We won't mention no names. Question. Who was that? And what was that? It questions the brother's integrity about, that's one of the things we have to stop doing in our community. In order for us to have power and to be united, if there's any doubts in my mind about what this brother say, then if there's some other kind of way that I can reach out to him, it'll just be me and him. It ain't gonna be no Holyfield Tyson BS. You understand what I'm saying? In the center ring, us sparring before the world to see which one of us is the best Negro, nigga, whatever you want to call yourself. But here, it's about us being empowered, and we empower ourselves. If there's been an error, whoever said we was perfect anyway, we only perfectible. All right, enough of the regression, time for progression. Brother Amos Wilson, welcome to African Echoes. Everybody give Brother Amos Wilson a round of applause.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to spend some time with you, and it's an honor to have been invited to do so. We'll talk a little bit today about culture and identity, and I could appreciate the prior speakers, and certainly I appreciate the candor, your candor. I think it's very, very important that we confront the reality of the situation we're in. And if some of you have known me, and I'm sure you have for a long time, I've spoken out again and again about the ego massaging approach to history. And in fact, I think maybe about the first times it might have been at the New Jersey Institute of Technology. And it's understandable why we want to massage our egos and to lift ourselves up and to feel good about ourselves, and that should be done. However, it is very important, too, that we look at the reality of the situation we're in, or else we can come blinded by our attempt to maintain ourselves with just good feelings and great feelings. And that can be just as harmful, you see, as not knowing the truth as well. We have to tell both sides of the truth. I heard you had a little thing here the last time here with Brother Coakley. I never quite got the story. I haven't had a chance to really meet Coakley, and I've heard his tapes. I have, frankly, no major problem with Mr. Coakley, and I wished him well. And I'm sure if we were to meet him today, we would get along quite well. I have no problems with Steve Coakley. He happened to hear an address, not an address, but a radio program I was on in D.C. I gather it might have been he that called and asked the question. And I hear sometimes he calls in disguise. But I want to clarify my situation, which is, of course, I think you're pretty much familiar with. But my critique of the conspiracy approach is very well known. Some of you, if you are not aware of it, I'm sure Brother Yusuf has probably the tape that I did at Harriet Tubman around the time when we were dealing with the issue of violence. Yeah, the violence initiative. Yeah. And I've stated it in other places as well as I did on the radio. So it's so my concerns about conspiracy approaches to history have been quite public and quite clear. I have no problem with us determining what conspiracies exist. And obviously there are conspiracies, and it's very important that we know those conspiracies. However, I do advocate that we cannot spend all of our energy into just trying to root them out, that there's much more work to be done than the mere discovery of conspiracies. Just as I have just got through saying about history. While we use our history to uplift ourselves, to uplift our esteem, to bring truth to ourselves, to transform ourselves, we must not get addicted to this. We must also look at the realities that confront us as people. And while we look at the conspiracies against us as a people, we must not also get addicted to just digging up conspiracies. As I have warned before, by the time you find out the conspiracy and who's behind it, it's too late. It's too late. It's too late. And it takes more than knowing about it to defend yourself against it. And you really don't have to know about it, frankly speaking. If you're only going to learn about conspiracy and then react, you remain in the same mode of action that we are in today, reactionary. Our orientation toward the world today as African people must be pro-actionary. Our ability to defend ourselves must occur before the fact. Our programs to liberate ourselves and to defend our liberation, to enhance our quality of life, to overthrow white supremacy must go on regardless as to what other people are doing. Whether they're plotting or scheming or not, it does not really matter. I will assume that whites are scheming. I will assume that there are black boulets. There's no problem with that. But my thing is what? We must build an African global system that will secure us against black boulets, white conspiracy, or any other ethnic group or conspiracy in the world. This is a positive approach. And so consequently then, we have to watch out then when we just get one-sided in issues and recognize we have to bring balance to ourselves in the world. You also have to be careful when you get into conspiracy theory, and that's good, and discovering conspiracies. Conspiracies have a way of seducing you and seducing audiences and creating pressures. And ultimately, if you don't watch it, when you get an audience caught up looking for a new something coming out from under the rock, and you build an image based on that, now in every lecture you got to bring out, some new piece. Sometimes the conspiracy starts happening before they start happening. You see, you start beginning to be a bit creative. And you can start, if you don't watch out, to feed on yourself. You see, because if you get built up in that kind of thing as a lecturer, and you get attached to an audience that way, and you know an audience is looking for this, then you start looking for enemies and people. And then you start naming people, and you start feeding the monster, you see. And after a while, you'll feed one person after another, and after a while, the community itself will eat on itself and feed on itself and destroy itself, you see. So we have to be very, very careful. There's nothing wrong with studying conspiracies. There's nothing wrong with studying other people's organizations. In the series I'm doing on power, that is exactly what I do. Much of the stuff that Brother Coakley deals with is dealt with as a part of my power series. Much of the information is public, actually. It's not really hidden and secret. If you have an interest in it, and that's your orientation, you can literally find it almost anywhere you want to. That's right. The important part, though, is just not naming it and pointing it out. At some point, it must be translated into a plan of action. It must become a part of the organization of the African American community. The understanding of how these other groups are working and other organizations must ultimately be built in to how we will design our organizations, how we will organize ourselves, how we then will use the strength that we already have to counter these organizations. The studies of these other organizations and so forth becomes a study in preparation for strategy, not just for naming, not just for passing on gossip, not just titillating people, but if this is the structure of the conspiracy against us, then the next issue becomes, what should be our strategy to remove this conspiracy, and what tactics should we use to destroy this conspiracy, given its design and its approach? But to merely point it out, to merely expose, and just leave it at that, really creates a problem. And ultimately, it can work against you. You can leave from one of those kind of lectures where you find out all the inside dope, feeling morally superior to those people who are conspiring against you and how dirty and low down and, all that they are. But you would not be any better off in defending yourself against them. You will not in any way have developed further steps for strengthening yourself to defend yourself against them. So, persons like Coakley have an important role to play in our community by exposing certain things and situations, but we must all be cautious and recognize that that is only a part of the struggle, that this now must be integrated into other aspects of our development as people, that we must not just come into these kind of lectures to feel morally superior to another people and so forth, but we must actually use this information proactively. There will always be those within our ranks who will operate against our interests. There's nothing new about this. It's been going on for hundreds of years. It will go on in the future. And we must discover them when we can. But we must also be in a position to neutralize them as well, not just to name them and let it go at that, leaving them in their same positions and place. That requires another level of organization. And it's that level of organization that I'm concerned about. Some of you are wondering about my power series that I've mentioned. And in that series, we talk about the think tanks and the other things as well. I am at the last lecture in terms of writing for that series. And when I do finish that last lecture, then the series will start. It was designed for 10 lectures. I've written 9 of the lectures, and I'm getting ready to write the 10th. Of course, I've fallen right in the middle of our Black History celebrations and African history celebrations. And this has retarded my capacity to sit down and complete the history, complete the final lecture. And there's a great deal of information too, and I have to really grade that information because I have to abstract a good deal of it. I cannot include everything in it. When I complete that lecture, then we will get started with the power series. I decided, in the light of my past history, that it would probably be better to write the lectures first before they're given, rather than trying to transcribe them from lectures such as this from the tape. It takes a tremendous amount of work to try to transcribe a tape, because when you do an oral presentation, you do so many things. And yet, when you look at it on a written page, you cannot just take a lecture, an oral lecture, and print it and put it out. It just doesn't work that way, because you pick up my tone, you pick up my facial features, you pick up a lot of things as you hear me talk that you will not pick up if the things are written on the page. So consequently, even when you republish a lecture, you find yourself doing a tremendous amount of editing, a tremendous amount of changing grammar, you know, so I'll stop in mid-sentence here, do other kind of things. I'll stop at a thought 1 minute and I go on 5 minutes about something else and then come back. In a written situation, that creates tremendous problems. So instead of lecturing and then trying to pull it off from the lecture, I decided what I'd do would I'd write the lectures first, and then we would present the lectures. And actually, the written material will be even broader than the lecture itself. And it's very important that the written material gets out. We are a very oral people. A good deal of our information is gained through hearing. But we have to face the fact now that we are in a so-called literate culture, and we are in an electronic age. And while we may honor our griots and we may honor the oral mode, we must also face the reality that that mode is not all we need to make it in this world. We cannot continue just to subsist on lectures alone. We must do a great deal more writing and a great deal more reading. And we must become much more involved in publishing information and in communicating information. There is no way I can communicate to you many of the things I would like to through speaking to you. It's not possible. I can't quote the references and go into kind of detail and the other stuff that you really need if you're really about work. You see, the most we can do here is give a bit of the information and motivate to a great degree. But in terms of a working knowledge, in terms of something that you can go back to again and again, in terms of the capacity to follow up references and so forth, you can't do that. You know, I've tried so much. And that's one of the reasons why I've gone on for 3 hours or 4 hours sometimes, because you're trying to, put it all in. You see, but no, you're going to have to read, and you're going to have to read a lot. We're going to have to change our mode a bit. While we honor our oral traditions, we also have a literal tradition as African people as well. We are the first people of the word, the written word. So there's no reason why then we should perceive ourselves as only people who are caught up in the spoken word. We must recapture that word. And I'll tell you another thing this evening as well. We must publish more as people. It's very, very important that we do that. We don't have enough information out here. That's very important, and we need solid information out here. We as a people must read also beyond our African-centered books. Some people are getting caught up in reading black-only books, or books written only by black authors. I warn you, that can limit your perception. We're writing as much as we can. Other people are writing as much as they can. But frankly speaking, the number of African-centered books written by African authors is still very narrow in terms of the kind of knowledge and information we need to have as a people. And consequently, then, we must integrate a lot of other knowledge from a lot of other sources into an African-centered program. I am concerned with Africanizing information. You can get information from anywhere and any place and anybody. It's not the source of the information that is of major importance. It is the question that you have in mind and the intentionality that you have in mind when you contact that information that is of importance. When you come with certain African-centered questions and certain African-centered intentions, you can subvert the intentions of other people. And even though they may have written lies, they may have written a book to falsify your image, with an African-centered question in your mind, and an African-centered intentionality in your mind, you can still gain useful information from that. And you can turn then their intentions into something that works for you. So you just can't say, well, because it's written by a white man, I'm not going to read it. Or because, well, it's lying and they're intended to. No, the fact that you know it's a lie is information. Now, why is it a lie? What is the end point of the lie? What is trying to be accomplished there? What is the technique of the lie? How is this hooked into propaganda? In what way is this group trying to transform my consciousness? What techniques and methods can I get from this to use against my enemies? What are their methods and techniques of propaganda that I can use to advance the propaganda for African people? Because, see, our propaganda is not necessarily lies either, you know. And propaganda is not necessarily a negative term. Propaganda comes from the basic word to propagate, to move information, to communicate information, to persuade. And the methods of moving information and communicating information and of persuading people is not a science of Europeans only, not by any stretch of the imagination. As a matter of fact, when you study the oral tradition, you'll find that that tradition is very much grounded in persuasion. And it's very much about persuasion. So then, hang in, you will hear about the announcement of the power conferences. And some of you, I think, have had some questions about the credit union. That's still going. We're still collecting pledges and so forth. Typically, as some of the speakers have indicated this evening, the major problem you have is often people who will not commit themselves to work and will not stick to projects. And so you have a situation here of trying to run a publishing company, not for profit. I must tell you, I don't get one nickel from any book that's sold. All of that goes into the African world information systems and is used as a base for education, consultation, building a strong publishing company so that we can disseminate information. None of that money goes into my personal income at all. But it also pays our rent over there. If some of you have been over there, you know I have a space as large as this space here. We want to utilize the space in many, many ways for the community and so forth, but we have to pay for that space. We pay almost $2,000 a month for that space. And so therefore, I have to write for this company as a way of generating income to maintain that space and to further our own agendas, and as well as have to administer it every day too. You know, we have to do promotions, we have to do editing, advertising, shipping, all of that goes on right there as well. So if I'm a bit slow in terms of getting out the credit union, I hope you can understand when you're trying to do all of these things at once, it slows things down. What I need more than anything else is somebody who's going to come over there and say, I will head the credit union. I have no problem with delegating responsibility. Not one bit. You want to be the director of the credit union? You got it. That's it. Maybe once a month or whatever, we'll talk and we'll move it forward. We wanted to do a loan fund over there. It's there. We got the ideas, we got the information, we got the structure, but we need committed people to carry things out. That is a problem. And you know who gives you the greatest problems? Gung-ho African-centered people. I'm telling you. I do better with the middle of the roaders. But that's a whole nother lecture. And males as well. Yes, I can see why preachers got a lot of women in the church. Very much so. Yeah. Hot, fired up nationalists are amazing people. We've got to get real, ladies and gentlemen. We must take care of business. I'm going to run quickly through this today. It's going to be a little theoretical. Hang in with me. I'm going to talk about culture and identity, even though I will not apologize for the theoretical tone to a degree, because again, nothing works like a good theory. A good theory is really the most concrete thing you can do. We've been deceived as African people into believing that to develop theory or to develop an abstraction is a waste of time. And yet we are ruled over by people who do just that. Develop theories and develop abstractions and develop conceptual things. We just want to jump right into it and go right at it without thinking. Theory is very, very important. It provides a way of course, of conceptualizing where you want to go and why you want to get there and what your endpoint is. A way of measuring your progress. A way, again, of bringing yourself back on task when you might have deviated for whatever reason or not, you see. I see people today, and I've been around the country in a number of places, who, say, for instance, have manhood training programs. They see the violence in our cities and so forth, and they get these grants or they got something else, and suddenly they want to transform young black men. And that's a worthy idea. And this must happen if we are to transform our community. But again, you have to ask, transform them into what, for what reason, to what end? You see. It's not enough just to give these young men African values, if that's what you're about, or to just provide them with another orientation in the world, if this is done in a vacuum, if this is not connected ultimately to the whole movement of African liberation and revolution. Values are not things you just hold and act on. Values at some level must be reinforced. They must be rewarded. If you train our young people into African values and into certain manhood values and leave them there, where they're still jobless and they're still unemployed and they're still oppressed, you're going to find yourself with a situation where sooner or later they will reject those values, you see. And consequently then, you need to see how that training is integrated with economic development, political development, with the intentionality of overthrowing white domination and white supremacy, and also with the intentionality of blocking Asian domination and the domination of any other group. You must understand very clearly what a warrior is and what training men really is about. And you must understand that we are at war. Yes. So you're not just training them not to sell drugs and not to do this and not to do this. They must now be trained to undertake a major, major combat with two major enemies now. Not just the Europeans, but with the Asians as well. And possibly the Latin Americans. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we do not have any friends out here. And we are being rapidly surrounded by enemies in this country itself. And we are being isolated as a group within this country as well as in the world. And the training of young men and women and all of us have to take that into consideration, you see. And we have to understand then theoretically what is going on, and then we have to put some real practical meat and bones on the theoretical framework. I'm going to talk a bit about culture here because I found it instructive sometimes to look at things in very basic ways. You see, we talk about racism, and often we don't bother to define it. We talk about imperialism. We don't look at it in enough detail sometimes to really deal with it concretely. We talk about culture as well, African culture, and yet we really we haven't, as far as I've seen, analyzed that concept very deeply. I'm not going to analyze it today, but we have not analyzed it as well as we should. What do we mean by that? Whose culture are we referring to? You know, when we say that word, are we trying to reintroduce Egyptian culture in America today? This is not Egypt. This is not 5,000 BC, 3,000 BC, or any other BC. This is not sub-Saharan Africa either. Now, what am I saying about that? Africa and our history and our African cultures are tremendously rich and have great deals to offer us. And we all feed from those cultures. But to a great extent, I think we are facing the reality that we have to synthesize all the goods in those cultures and create a new one. Even the cultures that you call traditional, if you really know the history of those cultures, are cultures that have evolved over time. They're not fixed at year one and have stayed at year one. And therefore now you figure if you recapture it, you've recaptured the essence of African culture, and this is what you're going to recapture, and this is where you're going to stay in the midst of this whole changing world. Even those cultures that we call ancient did what? Evolved and moved over time. So there's no reason for us today to believe that we have to stay stuck in time. We use and we take and we maintain the essence of those cultures, the central identity that those cultures provide us, the lessons that those cultures have taught us, and we conquer new ground. And we Africanize new territory. And it's the whole world that we can claim for Africa. The world that has gone in the past that we want to, but the world to come. We are a two-sided people in the sense that we have two sides to our brains. African thought is not circular only. Europeans have no claim over linear thinking. And to be an African person does not mean that you have to be anti-linear in your thought processes. God gave you two sides of a brain here. One side is intuitive, holistic, spiritual, and so forth in its approach to the world. And the other side is analytical, critical, abstract, logical, objective in its approach to the world. The brain has a set of nerves that attaches both sides of the brain that we call the corpus callosum, plus a number of other connections, the anterior commissure, the posterior commissure, which means that these sides of the brain were meant to do what? Communicate one with the other and to complement each other. That the human being is not meant to stay totally in one side of the brain and say, this side is the African side, I will ignore the other side. We can't do that, ladies and gentlemen. Anyone who studied deeply science, how science actually operates, has recognized that science operates based on intuition. Don't confuse the reading of scientific papers with how people come to arrive at scientific ideas. You see, often when you write the paper, you can't say, well, you know, I was laying up in my bed one night, and suddenly this dream came to me, and it all came together, and well, you don't hear that part in it, but that happens, doesn't it? It happens all the time. Or I was just talking to this guy, and one word, oh, wow, cued it off, or something like that. In fact, what you want to do if you want to be creative is to work very, very hard at the problem. Go at it by every means possible. Saturate yourself with it. Try to work it through and leave it alone. And often then the unconscious mind will sweep it right into your consciousness. That's a holistic thing. Then you sit down and write it according to what? The scientific method. You see, and you work out what? Its logic and the basis for it, and you rationalize it on what? Logical principles, rational principles. Then you may set up what? Crucial experiments and so forth and so on, you see, and work this through. But sometimes we confuse this because we read scientific papers, we read the order, and we read the rational approach, and we think that is the only way people arrive at scientific things. No, science truly works with an interaction between the intuitive and the logical, between the feeling and spiritual and the concrete. And I'm saying that because it's very, very important. I get sometimes some thoughts out here that wants to make us one-sided and make us reject all of the possibilities that we have been given to use the whole of our brain. And I tell you, our advantage as African people will be if we can be the first people to use all of our minds. Yes, yes. Let the other ones stay on the left, and let some stay on the right. Let's be able to move from what? Left to right when it is what? Appropriate. This is the captain of the ship. I've told you about Star Wars, you know, and you have a what? Left-sided, right-sided situation there with Mr. Spock exemplifying what? The left side, and Bones representing what? The right. He's full of feeling and love and brotherhood and you know, spirit. No, that's fine. It has its place, but it limits him too. His emotions overrun his better judgment often. His feeling gets out of place. But of course, then we see Spock over there, whose lack of feeling also causes him problems as well, you see. And so they are both limited by the fact that they're too much into one side of their heads. Kirk is the what? Is the balancer. He utilizes what? Both sides and their talents. And that's why he's what? The captain of the ship and is in control of the situation, you see. And ladies and gentlemen, you see then, an African-centered way of thinking involves the use of both sides of your mind and using them appropriately. And to the degree that we can use both sides of our minds appropriately, to that degree we will become captains of this ship that we live on called Earth and of this universe. Yes, and we must keep that in mind. Simply because we found some of our cultures, and those cultures may have been very spiritual and so forth, does not mean that that's the only side of our lives that we have to develop. We have to also look at the characteristics a people exhibit in terms of their whole ecological situation, you see, and see then the characteristics of their thought styles and approaches to the world within the context in which they were acting. You see, you just can't go in there and say, well, this is the way they were behaving, this is the African way, this is the way I'm going to behave. No, those ways reflect the ecological situation. As that situation would have changed, so would their ways of thinking change, you see. And it's very, very important that we keep that in mind. We must ask the degree to which certain styles of thoughts and approaches, even if they are African and have been exhibited by African people, are appropriate to the solving of our problems today. We must not be afraid to appropriate any form of thought that will advance our interests as people, regardless of where they come from. Because as soon as we do that, as soon as we appropriate any form of thought or any instrument to serve African interests, to serve African survival, to serve us as an African people, that instrument becomes transformed and becomes Africanized, and it becomes what? Ours. You see? And we have to recognize that and keep that in mind. We need more linear thinking at this point. Oh yes. Does that mean that we forget the intuition? Not at all. Does that mean we forget the oral tradition? Not at all. But it means then that while maintaining those traditions, we also must enhance other aspects of our personality. We want to look a bit at culture. What is culture? And we should ask this again. I admire Chancellor Williams very much, and I think the destruction of black civilization, of course, was a magnificent book, and I've said many times, though I think many people read it incorrectly, they read it as history, which it really is not per se. It is, as he stated very clearly, a set of case studies, an analysis of African culture and of African history with the question in mind, in what way did these cultures or this history advance our interests as a people, and in what way did this history fail us as a people as well? And we have to look at it that way. What were the problems represented by African cultures such that we permitted ourselves to be overrun by Europeans and we find ourselves in the situation that we find ourselves tonight? Understand? It's no insult for us to ask that question of ourselves. And it's no insult for us to look critically at African history and culture and to be critical of it. It is only through our being critical of our history and our culture that we can advance our interests as a people and survive as a people. Looking at the question, what is culture? Horton and Hunt said from their life experiences, a group develops a set of rules and procedures for meeting their needs. The set of rules and procedures, together with a supporting set of ideas and values, is called a culture. To a great extent, you see, a culture involves a set of rules and a procedure for meeting needs. And this is the thing we have to keep in mind. You don't have a culture just to have a culture. And you don't claim a culture just because it's a culture or just because it's African. The ultimate thing that culture must do is solve problems. That's why people evolve a culture. That's why culture comes into existence as a way of what? Solving problems and meeting needs. That's why, at a certain point, when a culture no longer meets the needs of a people or solves the problem confronting a people, that culture must be transformed. There's nothing sacred about holding a culture in the face of, new events and new changes. Unless, of course, you're free to do that if you're willing also to accept suicide or death. And you have that right to that choice. I tell people, we have the right to say, look, we're going to hold on to this culture even if it kills us. But we should be what? Very conscious of our decision. We should not be holding on to it out of a misunderstanding of what culture is supposed to do. Ultimately, culture is supposed to solve problems and to meet the needs of the people. And a culture then has to be measured against those standards. Does this culture meet our needs? Does it solve our problems? Chancellor Williams, in a sense, then looked at the African cultures, looked at African characteristics, and looked at them in terms of in what way did they meet our needs, and in what way did they deal with the slave trade and colonialism and the other kind of things that happened to us as African people. And after going through that, then he set up what? The plan, which a lot of people don't read. Which is the whole point of what? This is the whole point of the book. Not the first part, but really the second part. Looking at our culture and our history critically, and looking at our situation and where we are today as a result of that history and of those cultures, he then draws out a map for a plan, a way for us to what? Get out of our situation and to restore African civilization and to restore African people. But it's at that point most people sort of move on to something else. This is the place you must study. And we're going to include that in our power studies, by the way. That plan along with some others. The sets and rules and procedures together with a supporting set of ideas. Cultures are not just ways people sing and dance and what they eat and how they dress and the rituals and so forth that they perform. These ways of behaving and dressing and so forth are based on sets of ideas and values. And ultimately, in a deeper sense, it's this set of ideals and values that lay the basis for culture. Cluckarn and anthropologists indicated that culture is all the, and he defined culture as all the historically created designs for living, explicit and implicit, rational, irrational, and non-rational, which may exist at any given time as potential guides for the behavior of man, for the behavior of a people. In other words, culture creates designs as a result of its history for living and provides guides for its members, guides for behaving. As a set of the guides for designing, for guiding the behavior of its members, a culture provides standards of proper cognitive, emotional, and behavioral conduct. Culture provides a set of norms and concepts of what is to be expected to exist, why we expect them to exist. Though culture is a product of actual experience, culture is essentially ideological, meaning that it essentially exists in the mind, because culture ultimately is based on the sharing of beliefs and customs and expectations. We receive our culture as a result of, as a part of our social heritage. To the degree that the individual identifies or is at one with this culture, and to the degree to which the members of a culture identify with it, culture is represented in the minds of its people. In other words, we have to recognize deeply that culture cannot exist outside of ourselves. It only can exist in our minds and in our bodies as a people. And therefore, to a great extent, it is ideological more than it is physical, more than it is behavioral, more than it is just ways of dressing. Ultimately, a culture must be represented in the very minds of a people. And it is only through its representation as a mental entity that a people can identify with a culture. A culture is a way of thinking, a way of attending the world, of perceiving the world, of classifying and categorizing the world, of ordering the world, of processing information, and of evaluating the world. When we say then that the Europeans decultured us or distorted our culture, we are also saying then that the Europeans have distorted our modes of attending the world, our modes of experiencing the world, our modes of classifying and categorizing the world, our modes of processing information that comes from the world. So there's no little wonder then that we are having problems in what some people call education, particularly as it is Eurocentrically designed, that our children are perceived as having problems in thinking skills and math skills and science skills and so forth. Because ultimately, you see, culture provides you with a frame for thinking. It provides you with a structure for organizing information, for classifying information, for evaluating information, you see, for processing information. And when you distort a people's culture, then you distort their capacity to appropriately organize information and deal with it. And this is what has happened to us. This is the reason why I say again and again that the problem of education, in terms of the problems our children have in schools, are not education problems. They are political. They only express themselves as educational problems. The problems our children may have in paying attention, thinking so-called logically, categorizing, classifying, in terms of vocabulary and so forth, are really not academic problems. They are cultural problems, and they are the result of political interactions. Because in transforming our sense of who we are and what we are, and in transforming our culture, so was our thinking and so forth transformed as well. This is why ultimately the educational problems of our people will have to be solved in terms of cultural transformation, not just in terms of educational technique, you see. And this is what the whites try to lay on us. You know, we're going to discover finally that great reading technique. Children can learn almost in any way you teach them. But it's about more than technique. It must be a part of a total cultural structure. And the children must come with a cultural intentionality, because no technique is going to matter if they pay no mind, if they have no interest. You see, if their culture has given them little or no reason for learning what is to be taught, if what they're learning is really not relevant to their situation and their circumstances. And so we have to understand very much how culture itself structures the thought processes. Now, there are some of you who are saying, but there are those of us who knew nothing about African culture and we got all A's in school and so forth and so on. Remember this, though. We got these A's in school and we went through these schools at the price of alienation. As the gentleman who's Carter G. Woodson wrote about the fact that it took him, 30 years to get over that Eurocentric education? What is he talking about? To a degree, without that African-centeredness, without that African sense of culture, without an African-centered intentionality that determined why he was learning and for what reason he was learning and how he was going to use his learning in the interest of African people, he adopted an alien culture, as many educated blacks have had to do. In adopting the alien culture and adopting the alien outlook and adopting alien values and so forth, they adopted then a thought framework, you see, that allowed so-called success within the European academic system, you see. But the unfortunate thing about it is, once you adopt that structure and that mode and orientation of thinking, you can only work within it. And so you can keep your ability to think abstractly and logically and scientifically only if you work for us as a As a scientist. But you cannot take that thought and outside of that structure and use it in your own interest. And this is the dilemma that many of those who so-called succeeded in this system have had to face. You see, I categorize and I classify, but I categorize and I classify in terms of European structures, and I find that I'm only comfortable in working within those structures, and I can only advance those structures. The European system has this economic system set up in such a way that when you try to use this structured kind of thought outside of the system, it won't pay you. Yeah, it will punish you. And often your own group has problems with it, because our group only pays preachers. But it would rarely pay anyone else that tries to operate in its interest. And so you get caught up in two worlds. Socially, culture patterns the ways in which its members relate to each other, interact with each other, perceive each other, and the ways they organize, develop, institutionalize, and apply their human potential in order to adapt to the conditions in which they live, to satisfy psychological and social survival needs. Ultimately, as I said again and again, culture is about solving problems. But we're going to learn, as I've indicated before, solving problems in a cultural way, creating power in a cultural way, requires relating to each other in a particular sort of way. Implies interacting with each other in a particular sort of way and perceiving each other in a particular sort of way. I've indicated under other circumstances that individuals do not have power. Power is the result of the nature of social relations between people. The way people choose to interact with each other makes power. If you don't believe it, you could go back a few years and see how little white boys could order grown black men around. Were they big enough to beat them? Were they big enough, did they have enough power to knock them down? No, they didn't. But it was because those little white kids were in a, structured framework and had behind them, a set of structures and strategies that, because white people had chosen to relate to each other in a particular way and interact with each other in a particular way and interact with us in a particular way, even a white child could come out and express power over black folk. But the power was not inherent in the child, but it was inherent in the culture and inherent in how that culture was designed and structured. And it's out of this, and this is what I've told you before about an economic system. An economic system is not the mere existence of money. Economic systems existed prior to money. Money as an instrument of economy has come late in the history of man. And yet we've had economies for hundreds and thousands of years before money came into existence. So ultimately then, an economy must have something to do with the way people choose to cooperate with each other and relate to each other. It is out of this that an economy develops, and it's out of this that power develops, you see. So if you have a culture, the culture is going to provide patterns of relating and interacting. It's these patterns of relating and interacting that permits a people who belong to a culture to solve the problems that confront them. So you see, again, it's just not something, as the sister indicates, that you wear, you see, or the speech that you make. You see, it ultimately has to be about relating in a particular structured sort of way. This is what culture is socially. It is very important to keep in mind that a culture is, to a significant extent, a historical product. Let's talk a second about identity. Identity is the social and personal outcome of or product of an identification process. According to Bandura, this identification process is a process in which new responses are acquired and existing repertoires of behaviors are modified to some extent as a result of subjection to direct or indirect conditioning procedures. All cultures condition the people that belong to them. All cultures ultimately must have some means of rewarding and punishing behavior. And that's another thing we don't want to face, you know. We want everybody to do right just because it means doing right. And this is what I said earlier when we talk about these conspiracies and the boule. You're not going to win this game if you don't have a means of neutralizing people and rewarding people, you see. and controlling people. The reason why, as I've often said, the very first thing that we must do if we are to transform our children is to get control of them. Yeah. Yes. And we must become their primary rewarders and punishers. We must determine the conditions under which they are socialized if we want to create the kinds of people we need to solve our problems. You are not going to solve your problems giving the control of your children over to other people. And yet we sit around here hoping every day, after pushing our children and ourselves into the faces of white folk, into the faces of our enemies, that these people by luck or some means will happen to be the kind of people we need for ourselves. The very point and process of education is to create the people you need for your benefit. And if a culture is going to educate your children, it then will educate them to benefit whom? Itself, not you. Not you. You must bring your children under your own control, and you must be in control of the conditioning process. This is what it's about. If you don't have control of that, then really you're not going to have control of the children. Because identification with a culture, becoming cultured or enculturated, is the result of a culture approving and disapproving, of rewarding and not rewarding, and of sometimes even punishing, to ultimately shape the individual in a way that it benefits the culture, and ultimately the individual, him or herself. And this is what identity is about. It's about the patterning of thoughts, feelings, and actions after other persons who serve as models. You even learn to love. You know, we think that love is something natural, just flows out of us automatically. And yet we have a number of cultures who did not base marriage and these other things, as I've told you before, on romantic love. Even romantic love is taught and learned. Yeah. People are taught how to feel. And we do it all the time. You shouldn't feel that way. You should feel ashamed of yourself for thinking this way, for behaving this way. And we're so unconscious, we don't even recognize it, you see. But we are doing what? We are dictating what? Feelings, thoughts, emotions. What is love? The kids hear it all day long in their records, right? The chill run up my spine. I can't get him out of my mind. I can't eat. I can't sleep. I can't. What is all this is what? Defining what? This is the way you feel if you're in what? If you're in love, you see. And when you got that feeling, then you can do some other things. And you can, make all kind of commitments based on that. But many cultures have built marriage and family and other things on different modes of thinking and behavior other than that. And when you study the history of romantic love, when this type of love approach and this type of approach for building families and so forth first started coming up, there were many people who thought it was just a sign of madness, of sickness, of a precarious basis upon which to build family and culture, you see. But what we're trying to illustrate here is that culture, to a good extent through its conditioning processes and other processes, through providing models, helps people to pattern their ways of thinking and feeling and behaving, and pattern attitudes. Both the conditioning procedures and contingencies and the models are provided by culture. And of course we recognize that this is one of our major problems today, that often the models that we want to exhibit before ourselves and our children, and often the means by which we can reward our children's behavior have not been placed in our hands. That another culture has control of the conditioning mechanism and has control of the models that by which our children are socialized. We must recognize again then, if we are serious about enculturating our people and enculturating our children, then we must gain the means by which we have to condition their enculturation. We must gain the capacity to reward, to punish, and to reinforce, to model the kind of behavior for our children and ourselves that we need to model. Identity is achieved when, as a result of having undergone the identification process, the individual comes to perceive himself as possessing a distinct and unique character or personality, as being a person in his own right, as being able to answer the questions to his own satisfaction: who am I? What am I? And what do I do with my life? Identity, to the extent that it is a cultural product, and identity is a cultural product. And I want to emphasize this because, you see, in this society, we stress individualism. And I try to get across to people all the time that in reality there's no such thing as an individual. That is a social fiction. It is a type of label we use, but it does not exist in reality. That the individual, the thing that we call an individual, is really a synthesis of social experience. A unique combination of our having interacted with others and having undergone social experiences. And it's our unique way of expressing our social relations and our experiences. But who we are and what we are is the result of social relations. It is not something that is completely what? Unique to us and not shared on some level with others. The very fact that you speak a language means that you have a shared identity on some level. If you were completely individual, no one would be able to understand what you were saying. You see? You could not fit into what? An ordered system and in an ordered society. If you want to imagine you can be a complete individual if you're in space all by yourself. But then what would be the point? It would have no what? No meaning. It would be pointless. Even the concept of individual can only achieve its definition within a social structure. It only has meaning within a social structure and in terms of relating socially to someone else. Otherwise, it is pointless. It is the social that creates the individual, not the other way around. And yet those who rule over us, you see, will have us think that we can be individuals in and of ourselves and by ourselves without any connection whatsoever to anyone else. And in that way, of course, it can maintain the disunity of our culture and maintain our disunity as a people and ultimately destroy us as a people. So identity is a cultural product. It is the incarnation of a cultural ideology, ecology, and of cultural practice. Identity is culture made flesh. Identity is an instrument for the expression of cultural power. Yes. When an individual identifies with a culture, and remember we said culture is ultimately contained what? In us. Then the individual becomes the what? Instrument of that culture. You see? And this is what I tried to tell you some lectures ago when I talked about manhood, right? When I told you that manhood is a social definition, and to be a man is to be socially defined, so that in expressing what it means to be a man, in defending one's manhood, one also does what? Expresses one's culture and defends what? The culture. And in defending the honor of one's manhood, one defends what? The honor of the culture and the honor of the people. And therefore, ultimately, manhood is an expression of the culture, not of a chauvinistic wish on the part of a male. It is not to be defined in isolation and detached from the needs of the culture itself. That when manhood becomes defined, detached from the needs of the culture itself, detached from the needs of people itself. When boys are not trained into men relative to the culture, then these boys will prey upon the culture and destroy the culture. And this is a part of what we have in so-called black-on-black violence. Boys who've been brought into manhood in ways that are detached from African culture and African people, you see, who have not engaged in training in an organic relationship to their Africanness. And therefore, since they are not socially defined, they then become antisocial in their behavior. So ultimately, you see, an identity and a personality is a cultural instrument, and it is through this identity and through this personality that the culture expresses itself, and the culture is perpetuated, and the culture has an impact on the world, and the culture expresses itself as power and defends itself as a culture. But if it defends itself as a culture, it defends its members as people as well. You see? But when people are detached from a culture, they stand alone. And they are undefended. They become vulnerable. And others now destroy them one by one, here and there. And ultimately, a whole of a people are wiped out. Thus, identity, self-concept, are products and instrumentalities as much, if not more, political, economic entities than social, psychological entities. What am I saying here again? We're used to seeing identity as a psychological concept. You see, we talk about my identity as if it belongs to what? Me only. You see, my personality, my this. No. Ultimately, we must recognize that our personalities and our identities are, to a good extent, instrumentalities for our culture. But the thing that we want to recognize more so than this is that identity, self-concept, what we call the self and personality, are as much political and economic entities as they are social and psychological entities. In other words, identity, even in a diffused state, is a political economy, an organization of interests, tastes, desires, passions, ideals, motives, values, etc., the pursuit of and the satisfaction of which maintains social power relations, social prerogatives, the integrity of the social, political, economic system, the cultural status quo. What am I saying here? The culture, in inculcating particular values in people, in inculcating particular desires in people, and they don't, see, the culture doesn't inculcate into you the desire for what? Everything does it. No, it says what? You should desire this and not that. This is desirable, but this is horrible. You know, this you should be interested in, that you don't have to worry about. You see, this you should feel strongly about, that you shouldn't have to worry about. You see, this you should strive to be. These are the ideals we wish you would actualize. This you don't have to try to strive to be. As a matter of fact, you can reject this. This is where you should try to go. These are the goals that we approve of. The others we don't. Now, so a culture then organizes these values, these ideals, these interests, and so forth. This is a part of our cultural identity, such that when you pursue the satisfaction of these desires, when you pursue the actualization of the cultural ideals, when you pursue the interests that the culture has inculcated in you, what do you do then? By doing this, you maintain what? The culture itself. You see? And many of those things are political, and many are economic. In other words, if a culture tells you that eating a certain food is the right thing to do, and this is what we're about, and eating this food is central and important to our culture, then believe it or not, there's going to be a system of production to do what? Produce what? That food. a system of what? Distribution as well, you see. And a whole system of economic what? Relations, you see. So therefore, this taste, even the taste for food, or certain interests, when you pursue them, maintain a social system and maintain an economic system. And if the structure of that culture, if it's a class culture, a class structure, and if that structure is built on wealth and the accumulation of wealth and the control of the means of production by certain people, your pursuit of those cultural tastes helps to maintain the structure of that culture. Am I getting through? Am I putting you to sleep? Hang in with me, please. Okay. It's very important that we get this in mind. Because without this theory and understanding this, you're going to go blindly into the training of young boys and the training of your young girls. You're going to take them through the rituals and everything, but they're going to still have European taste and desire European things. And they still pursue European ideals and all that, even with their Cantillon. And despite then, and their superficial behavior, if those tastes and interests and passions and so forth are not also transformed in particular directions, despite their superficial attachment to African culture, they will continue to perpetuate their oppression and maintain the system that they think they're trying to get out from, you see? And this is why you have to understand this theoretical thing so that you know where you're going when you're talking about educating these children African-centrically, you see. This is why you ultimately are going to have to reject multiculturalism and understand that it's African-centeredness that must be taught to our children, not multiculturalism. Multiculturalism says, all right, everybody's culture is okay, you know, Pollyanna. Oh, you got a culture, I got a culture, all God's children got a culture. So, you know, it's all right. You can taste from this one, you can taste from that one, you buy from this one, you buy from that one, which is exactly what black folk are doing right now. You see? And therefore what? Keeping other people's families alive, keeping them out of crime, keeping them well housed, you know, and all the things we're doing because we have not controlled our what? Taste and interest and evolved them in ways that they advance our culture and us as a people. Please get rid of multiculturalism. And it makes you believe every culture is all right. Here you are suffering from European culture, and now you're going to, you know, it's all right. You can't put one down and put the other one up. I mean, Europeans amuse me anyway talking about their cultural traditions and what great traditions they have brought to the world. The tradition is what you do. Yeah. And it's an insult as an African man to have Europeans talk about their great tradition. You may talk about your philosophy, but that's not your tradition. You may talk about your religion, but that's not your tradition. Or if it is your tradition, then no matter how beautiful it sounds, I must reject it because it enslaved me. It oppressed me, and the whole bit, you see. So, and I don't care how sweet it sounds and how logically it is put together or how literate it may be. The ultimate thing is in what way does it express itself in relationship to me and my people? And if this is the outcome of European tradition, then that tradition must be rejected. You must understand, ladies and gentlemen, what Europeans call great tradition goes hand in hand with their capacity to kill. You know, the Germans, I couldn't understand. You know, we were the literary people and we were the, you know, this and that. But that's one of the reasons why you were able to kill the way you did. Because that was also in there as well. You look at Elijah Muhammad, a misunderstood person. Yeah, misunderstood. Because again, sometimes we're so right-brained, we let our dislike or disapproval of certain of his behaviors overshadow our capacity to see what gifts he brought us as a people, and to come to really understand what this man was about and the greatness of what he created in the Nation of Islam. Yeah. Because we let a series of events get to us so much, we want to throw the baby out with the wash water. You see. But what was he doing? He recognized, too, that cultural identity, religious identity, were as political as they were psychological, were as economical as they were psychological, you see. And he recognized then that he had to also change the taste of black people and change their what? Interest as well. Their emotions and their what? Feelings as well. And a part of that change was projection of the white man is demon mythology, which was very functional and real. But very functional. You see, I've told you a lot of people think, oh, well, that wasn't the truth. It wasn't the point. It wasn't the point. It amazes me now. You know, someone mentioned the Tuskegee experiments. These whites are going to tell all the truth now that they got the what? The world, what? Wrapped up. But in wrapping it up, they projected the what? The myth. Because the myth, the major function of the myth is to organize people, to organize a people's perception of themselves, to give them a sense of destiny and commonality, to arrange their social relations in such a way so that they could achieve particular points and particular ends. And it's not that they didn't know that Egyptians might have been African. It was in their literature. That's a lot of where we got it from, isn't it? But at the point where a mythology of Africans as being uncultured served to organize them and create a unity among themselves, and served to create a set of relations that permitted them to make a conquest of the globe, they projected that mythology. And it was a powerful one. Now that they think they have it made, they say, well, yeah, you were Egyptians, weren't you? Oh, yeah, we did give you TB down there. You know, what are you going to do about it? Oh, now we're becoming honest folk, you know. But what happened? No banks are changing hands. No means and ownership of production are changing hands. No real control of your destiny is changing hands. But you're multicultural now. We have greater understanding and truth. It's got to go deeper than that. You got to do more than tell the truth. You're going to reparate yourself. We're going to take these reparations from you. You can admit we're Egyptians if you want to, but that's not the end of it. No way. And we as black people can't fall for the okie doke. Oh, they say we're Egyptian. Ain't that wonderful? Oh, they're saying that we're this and we're that. Isn't that nice? Now, you see, because now we're moving toward multiculturalism, right? Suddenly we're going to see them all as nice and sweet and wonderful. But what? The actual power relations that run the world will do what? Be exactly what? The same. As a matter of fact, we will even support them now because we feel so good about ourselves. Elijah Muhammad then sought to change taste. So when he had you eating that bean pie, you see, it was a different kind of thing. And eating once a day, wearing a different type of clothes, you see. It was just not an imposition of tyranny. That's what the other people would like to tell you, even though they were tyrannizing you far worse than Elijah Muhammad was doing, if you want to call it that. But what? If we demonize the Europeans, we wean our people from the pursuit of things what? European. You see? If we then create new tastes, and tastes for which we can produce, you see, now the person in pursuing their taste will produce for their own nation and economically what? Support the nation. In other words, your money follows your interests. Your money follows your tastes. Your money follows your what? Passions. And one of the major powers that this culture has is to create tastes, passions, and interests in African people. And this is what Eurocentric culture is about. The organizing of African tastes, interests, and passions, so that in our pursuit of those interests and passions, in our attempt to satisfy them, we carry the Europeans all of our money, and we impoverish ourselves looking for the better life and the better feeling. Therefore, the Europeans have all the products for which they've created a taste in us. And then other immigrants come in and get the products under their control. And we as African people then support and feed all of them while we starve our own children. And consequently, you see, our children have learned often that the only way they can get money out of our pocketbooks is to knock us in the head and take it. That's right. Because they're not going to get it by what? Investing and spending in a planned sort of way and following tastes that have been created within our own culture and so forth and so on. Because we have told them that buying things European and pursuing things European and so forth was what it means to be alive and to be real and to be free and the whole bit. And yet it's the pursuit of those very things that has imprisoned us and will maintain us in prison. This is why I've told you many times before that we will be most enslaved when we feel freest. Yes, we will be most impoverished when we feel wealthy. Because as soon as we get the money, we're going to do what? Take it somewhere else and impoverish ourselves. At the moment we feel free to buy everything we want to, we're going to buy it from whom? Others. And they will use that wealth to maintain our oppression as a people, you see. So this is why we must understand here the relationship between culture and identity. We must understand that culture itself is an instrument of power. Some people criticize Elijah Muhammad for calling Islam black Muslim, or black Islam. But there's a purpose there. It's unorthodox. Islam is not a racist religion. Even though all I see are doggone Arabs hanging up there in North Africa. And I don't see any equal sharing between African Africans and Arab Africans in the heart of Islam. I don't give a hoot what you say about how universal it is. Show it to me in practice. And I don't see it in practice. And you'll learn something very clear. These Europeans and these other groups are going to lay all kind of universal bullshit on your head as a way of maintaining you in slavery. Yes. In fact, the best way to enslave a Negro is to get him universal. Yeah. I'm for all people. That means he can't be for himself. He even feels guilty about being for himself. Yeah, you tell him, look, let's act in terms of who we are. Oh, no, I'm for all people. Which means I can't commit myself to what? To anyone else. But you see, when other people have already got the scheme set up, what you're for all for doesn't work for all people, though. It seems to always go to what? Particular people. Because I've said, you see, we are absolutists. You see, we believe that if we know the truth and hear the truth, that's the only thing we must believe. And I've told you before, in terms of the Christian theology here, that Africans did not come to America as Christians. I don't care how much you shout and kick over benches. You got to understand that. Your African and our African ancestors did not come to America as what? Christians. And it's very important to recognize that. Does that impugn Christianity? No, I'm not about attacking Christianity. I'm not about attacking the reality of Christ or your sincerity. This is not what this is about. You must, though, ask the question, who taught you Christianity? And why did they teach it to you? In other words, you must ask what? Functional questions. How does your teaching me this work for you? And how does it work for me? Even though what I believe you're saying is true and absolutely true, my believing it and your believing the same thing brings about what? Two different consequences. So while the principle you're teaching is universal and absolutely true, given the context in which this is operating, in the context of the fact that you have all the money and you have all the power, my believing this is going to what? Help you to do what? Maintain your money and your power and maintain my weakness. So you can't just fall for an idea simply because it's universal and absolutely true. You've got to look at it within the context in which that idea is being projected. And you got to look at it in terms of who is believing it, because the idea will generate effects based on the context in which it operates, not in and of itself. You see, and this is what has happened to black folk who've taken up other religions and had those other people say, you know, you just believe this, and this is true, this is universally true. This has nothing to do with race, and Islam is not a racist religion. That's fine when the Arabs own what? Everything. And that means then that I won't perceive the Arab as a race, right? Even though it was just by coincidence, all of his race owns everything, has everything. Then I'll be made to feel guilty for even thinking in terms of what? My race. Even though my children are going hungry, they're robbing me at night, terrorizing the community and the whole bit, it's wrong for me to think of them as race and think in terms of them as a people and so forth, because I believe in this universal principle. And yet it is the inequality of wealth and the inequality of power and all kinds of inequalities that are what? Creating the problem. But because I am not allowed to see these inequalities in terms of race, you see, even though when we see the victims of them, the race is quite apparent, I cannot transform this situation. You got to be careful with this game, ladies and gentlemen, because this is the kind of game people run on you all the time. You see, whenever people bring you universal truths, whenever they bring you, you know, these great brotherhood ideas, you must ask yourself how believing this is going to function for you. And given your power, and given this or given this, how's it going to function for you and how's it going to function for me? These fighters went over the world talking about the invisible hand in the laissez-faire economy, you know. Or they come up with some stupidity like, we are all God's children, we are all one, we are all human. Nationalism is wrong, we shouldn't discriminate according to border. People should be able to invest wherever they feel like investing, you know. And people should take advantage of opportunities wherever they arise. Now that sounds so nice and neat, doesn't it? And it is. I have no problem with that. Except, though, you got to move beyond that. You got to look at who's saying it, and if I believe it, what's going to happen? Now, the Europeans said this because they had all the what? The money. You see? So when they convinced our people to believe in free markets and open markets and reject nationalism, we're all God's children, we all one, and therefore all markets should be open for investment regardless as to who you invest. The deal is, if they had all the money, they're going to end up owning all the land. They're going to end up owning all of the means of production with your consent, with your moral consent. You see? And then you're going to wonder if God is cursing you. If something is wrong. You have to understand, then you can't just let people lay an idea on you, a universal concept, a universal religion, and a universal this, and then assume that all is well. You got to look at reality. So if it's so damn universal, spread that damn money around. Universal. You believe people should invest wherever they fit? Well, let's first even up the money. And then we can invest cross borders and all over the other place. But no, you insist on holding on to your money. You see, and you believe in what? Private property and all this stuff, and you're going to convince me not to look racially or nationally, and this allows you then to what? Maintain control. And this is the game that we're in. So people say, well, Elijah, you know, you're a black Muslim. We don't believe in blackness. No, 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 ladies and gentlemen. Jesus says, what? Man is not made for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath for whom? For man. Ultimately, religion is not made just to be served by man, but what? The religion must what? Serve man. God is not only to be served, but God also must serve the people. Oh yeah, I know, you think they done told you should lay all on your face and roll and carry on. No way. No way. There is a what? Contract. There is a covenant. It's in your Bible. The Israelites had a what? Covenant between God and themselves. There was an agreement there that what? I do for you and what? You do for me, man. It's not just about laying down praying and do whatever you want to the Lord. And if you read Moses, and if you read it, you will see going on between Moses and God, constant what? Negotiation. In fact, that's what I find so fascinating about reading the Exodus story. Hey, this man sits down and negotiates. You remember that time they get near the border and they start hollering and screaming, talking about they were better off than slavery, and they wanted to go back to Egypt, and they were about to hang Moses. They were within an inch of hanging Moses. You know, Moses nearly got hung several times. You know, a lot of people don't read this thing very well at all. He was not seen as some holy man with a halo above it. Those people didn't see Moses that way at all. They got at him. They got so out of hand until God said, let me just strike these people with a thunderbolt and wipe them from the face of the earth. Yeah. And then Moses started doing what? Negotiating with them. And even reminded God, what? Hey, wait a minute now. Remember, you brought them out here on the promise, right? Yeah. And you said that you had a what? Promised land for them, and so forth, and this for them. How are you going to look if all of a sudden you get out here and destroy these people and go, in a sense, against your word? Oh, yeah, you're right, Moses. Yeah, I did say that. Read it. You don't have to believe me as your preacher tell you. Read the Bible. It's right there. Because a negotiation there. What? There's a service between the two things, not just one-way street. And so in black Muslims, in the black nation of Islam, Islam is used also to do what? Serve black folk. You must understand that. As soon as you remove the blackness from it, and blackness has no relevance to it, it loses its capacity to serve our interests. And more often than not, it will serve the interests of Arabs and serve the interests of other people, because it will not change the pre-existing social economic power relationship. You see, and you have to understand that. Elijah understood it very well. You see, so no, we're going to make it black because we wanted to what? Serve black. A racial identity, an ethnic identity, is not a mere way of identifying yourself by a word or a label. It is not a mere designation of ethnic characteristics, nor just a designation of people who may look alike to some degree, or share a similar area, or share a particular area. Ultimately, an ethnic identity is a prescription for behaving, for relating to each other in a particular way, for seeing yourself and seeing each other and seeing the world and relating to God and relating to nature and relating to everything else in the world so that it operates in the interest of the group. Must understand that. In the racial designation or identity is a prescription for action, is a prescription for relating. And in the nation of Islam, when it was black Islam, it means blacks who were Muslims would relate to other blacks in a particular sort of way so that it would benefit blacks who were Muslims. And that's the result of it. Changing their taste, changing the diet, changing the values, and so forth. And what do you mean there then? since the taste changed, the money that flowed out of the Nation of Islam, pursuing the taste created by other people, did what? Flowed back in. Flowed back in. And it means then that money created what we call an accumulation of capital within the nation. It created, in many ways, a savings on the part of the people. Because the $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 that they would spend buying junk and garbage and other kind of crap now was saved, and that saving now could be used to be invested in businesses, to be invested in schools, could be invested in education and the other kinds of things they needed to do for themselves. And that accumulation of wealth was also an investment in power in a society where wealth and power are often correlated. Am I getting through? I know you're getting a little restless. I'm going to let you go in a minute. Let you go in a minute. You see, we have to understand what went on here. I create your taste for beans. I create your taste for this. And because I do, I'm going to make the pie for you, right? We make the pie what? For ourselves. So now you eat the pie, but now, and you spend the money, and that goes back, and we can buy what? Farms. And now we can do what? Grow the beans. You see, we can create the what? Canneries. We can now build a what? A whole system of production based on the reorganization of taste and the reorganization of interests. You see, this is what African-centered education is about, ladies and gentlemen. It's not merely about the teaching of African culture or of African history. That's only a part of it. It is about the transformation of the personality, the transformation of social relations among African people. Ultimately, it is about economic and political development. Ultimately, it is about power. Ultimately, it is about freeing the black mind to move in the world, to be powerful in the world, you see, to produce for self, and to enhance African wealth, and to enhance the African status in the world. This is what it's about, and it's deeper even than this. But let's keep this in mind, and I'll bring it to a close here. When you're talking about black culture in America, when you even talk about African culture in Africa, you must recognize and you must ask yourself, what is the political economy of the oppressed black culture? In other words, remember, our personalities is a political economic structure. Particularly, and therefore, if we let another people shape our personalities and shape our cultures, those cultures and personalities will operate to maintain their system and their dominance. So while we may praise black culture in America and African culture in Africa and in the diaspora, we must also ask ourselves the question, what is the political economy of these cultures, and what are the various personal and social identities these cultures produce, and to whose end? We must recognize that the basic identities of the oppressed are largely socially manufactured by their oppressors' culture and related social practices. And to a good extent, what we call black culture in America today, even though it has deep African roots and African history still buried in it, is still related to and incarnations of Europe-centric culture. And we've got to recognize this and deal with it. We just can't praise it unabashedly. We must look at the degree to which what we see as black culture today is an instrumentality of European culture. And I mean this in the real sense, and an instrumentality of European power, to the point of where African men and women actually fight in combat for European interests. You see, because of the way we have what? Defined ourselves as men and women. And even as the way we have sought to try to define black culture in America. You see. And now we have our own people on the soil of Africa. And now we have a man, Colin Powell, plotting out and designing the program for Europeans to maintain dominance over African people. Yes. Because we've defined our Africanness in a peculiar way. Black male identity is hooked into this thing as well, which is one reason why we have a lot of problems. today. The reclamation of our male youth and our female youth requires an appropriate, thorough, pragmatic, critical analysis, cultural analysis of the deculturation and reculturation of African Americans and their social products as represented by black male identities and female identities. It's not enough for us to show how we were decultured during the diaspora and slavery and so forth. It's very important for us to understand how we were recultured and reorganized. We are not uncultured simply because we don't have African culture. You see, we have been what? Recultured and rearranged and restructured. You see, and we must understand in depth how that restructuring took place and how it expresses itself in us and in the way we relate to each other. You see, because it is this reculturation ultimately that we must do what? We must reconstruct. We must tear down. We must remove outside of ourselves. So it's not enough to say what we have been missing as a people, or how African culture what taken away from our people, but we must come to understand how we have been newly created by another people. And how does that new creation under their power represents itself in our personalities and in our social lives, in the way we think, in the way we behave, in the way we perceive the world, in the way we relate to each other and the whole bit. Because it's with that understanding that you design an educational curriculum for African children. You see, you're not just going to teach them history and culture. You're not just going to raise their self-esteem. That's just the beginning. You got to say, because you can feel good and still be Eurocentric, you know. And you can have high self-esteem and still be Eurocentric as well, you know. Yeah, so there's a whole nother process going on. This is why the multicultural curriculum is not sufficient. It is not just a matter of teaching us to respect other people's culture and to look at and accept cultural differences. African people are in a process of reculturation and a process of reconstruction as a people. You see, it's not a situation of where the Chinese say, well, you didn't teach my culture in the schools, even though my culture has maintained continuity for the last 10,000 years. You see, and even though I still speak Chinese, I still eat Chinese food, I still buy from Chinese restaurants, I still do almost everything what? Chinese. Now I just want you to respect my culture. But that's not where the African people what? Are. You have a cultural discontinuity. You have cultural what? Trauma. Yes, you have a whole reconstruction to undergo. And therefore a little Pollyanna multicultural education cannot meet the needs of African people. Even African people on the continent are in a process of what? Reconstruction and redesign. You understand? So no light course in dancing with other people and that kind of stuff is going to do what we need. Not at all. The reclamation of our male youth requires an appropriate, thorough, pragmatic, cultural analysis of the deculturation and reculturation of African Americans and their social products as represented by black male and female identities. How these identities, whether considered pro-social or anti-social. I've told you on other occasions that a great enemy to the black community is the good black person. Yes, is the law-abiding black person. Yes. Oh, yes. In fact, we're in this mess because of law-abiding, good black people. Yes. What did I tell you? These youngsters that you want to damn in so many ways did not create the world that they live in. They were born and they are reared in the world that we created, that adults what? Created. They are not making the ghettos. They are not making the joblessness and unemployment. They are not making the poor schools and poor and miseducation. They are not doing and creating these things. It is who? Us, black adults, African adults. And to a great extent, it is us, law-abiding and good ones. It is us, ones who don't see color. Yeah. It is us who want to be loved by Koreans, want to be loved by Arabs, want to have racial harmony, want peace between the sisters and the brothers all over this land. You have your mind. And yet you can't have peace in your own house. You can't have peace in your own neighborhood. You can't have peace in your own street. And it's just so Negroish. Really. He's going to solve the problem of all the people before he can solve his own. Yeah. He's going to have the great mosaic, and he can't even get his own piece together. But this is the role the world has set for us so everybody can succor us, you see. Yeah, that's what all it's about. And what people in the world are going to have any confidence in your capacity to work for all men when you haven't demonstrated your capacity to do what? Work for yourself. I'm qualified to solve all men's problems. Solve your own problem, man. You haven't solved your problem yet. In fact, we don't need you to solve our problem. We're doing quite well. We're rich, we're powerful, we're in control, we got great armies, and you want to solve our problem? Yeah, you know, it's amazing. It's amazing. But, you know, again, what did I tell you? In order for us to be in the condition we are in, we have to be what? Backwards. We have to be completely returned around. And we have to go in the very opposite of the way we should go as people. We have to forget our first impulse and change this thing around a bit, you see. We must understand here. And it is the pro-social ones. They feel good. I can spend my money where I want to. But why do you only want to spend it with other people then? What is it? I live wherever I want to. Then why do you want to live with only other people then? What is it? And watch the Negro, as I've said before. Yeah. I'm free to buy where I want to, but he never feels free enough to buy from himself. I'm free to live where I want to, and he thinks that means he has to live in a white neighborhood. You see? I'm free to do this and free to do that. And each expression of his freedom requires that he gives up to someone else. Right. The white man doesn't want to live in your neighborhood, but yet he doesn't feel like that's an infringement on his freedom. He doesn't buy from you. He doesn't feel that that's an infringement on his freedom. Doesn't live with you. Doesn't feel that's an infringement on his freedom. Doesn't go to school with you. Doesn't feel like that's an infringement on his freedom. You see? The Koreans the same way. In fact, they feel free the further they can get away. You see? But only the Negro, in trying to express his freedom, feels compelled to impose himself and his money and his wealth and his talents and everything else on outsiders and other people. Yes, backwards, turned around. And to do it for himself, he feels bad. He feels guilty. He suffers from a guilty conscience. He feels irreligious. But it has to be that way if we are to be what? Suckered and robbed as a people. Yeah, and this is the name of the game. There shall be no racial harmony for the next 20 or 30 years, ladies and gentlemen. You got to get used to the idea. You got to get used to the idea, if you're going to win your freedom, that you're going to be disliked by a lot of people and a lot of ethnic groups. Yeah, you got to get used to living with great tension if you're going to reclaim yourself and reclaim your life. If you're trying to maintain peace and harmony with every other ethnic group, they're going to put conditions on it. You can maintain harmony if you let me sell to all your kids and you never own anything. You can maintain harmony as long as you don't disturb my economic domination. It's just like this anti-Semitism stuff that's got LIB jammed up. Oh, yeah. People, you know, at one point it's not a race, it's a religion. At another point it's a race. You know, what's going on here? The thing that you have here, ladies and gentlemen, is a political strategy. Yes, sir. And an economic what? Strategy. An instrument of what? Control. A means by which one can control the behavior of others. You can call it religion, ethnicity, anything you want to. But its ultimate reality is that it is used to do what? Control the behavior and perceptions of other people in the interest of the people who belong to that thing. That's all it is. And the first question you ask, and so the thing goes out, you're anti-Semitic. Now, it doesn't matter what you said, whether you told the truth or not the truth, or this or that, has nothing to do with that. Not at all. It has to do, now the next question you're going to ask is, oh, how can I not be anti-Semitic? Don't say this, don't say that, don't do this, don't do that, and then we won't call you what? Anti-Semitic. And so when in striving to be what? Not anti-Semitic, you then what? Fall under the control of another people. Regardless as to whether they are right or wrong, or regardless of how unfair they are, as soon as you meet the requirements of not being called anti-Semitic, you're under control. And yet here's a people that's less than 3% of the American population, less than 1/10 of 1% of the world's population, who through the use of that term and through the throwing of that accusation can manipulate whole political and economic and social systems. And then they're the first one to tell you that you shouldn't talk in terms of race. And you should not use what? Your ethnic identity as a base of what? Power. And you should not use your ethnic identity as the base for political and economic strategies, you see, and as a means of what? Controlling other people's behavior and so forth, you see. Ethnicity is much deeper than the demarcation of ethnic characteristics, man. You see, and cultural characteristics, you see, are part of the totality of a people's power. And we have to understand that. And when we are training our youngsters, we have to understand that. We have to get these young men to understand, and when we are training them for manhood and the young women for womanhood and so forth, it requires that we perceive white supremacy as the major social and political and economic spiritual problem to be resolved by African people, and that we ask ourselves the question, what kinds of men and women must we produce in order to overthrow white supremacy? And overthrow white supremacy must be our goal. If you're not about overthrowing white supremacy, you're not about African-centeredness. And the other thing is, if you're not about nation building, you're not about African-centeredness either. Anyone here is talking about African-centeredness and so forth is not talking about nation building and not talking about the building of a Pan-African economic and political system is really, to my mind, not talking about African-centeredness. No, sir. Because the education of our children and what that education means and what it should contain and the educational experiences they should undergo must be defined within a framework of overall purpose and goals for our people. Where are we going? What is our major problem in the world? One of our major problems in the world is white supremacy. This is not the problem of white children, you see. And an appropriate education of African children then requires that they be trained to do what? Solve that problem. And an education that does not include how to overthrow white supremacy among black people and how to destroy white power over black people is not African-centered. I don't care how much culture you teach, how much history you teach, it's not about that. It's not about that. An education that is not about building a black nation and a nation within a nation and an African system of people cannot be an African-centered education. When you study economics and science and all of these other things, they must be studied within the frame of where you're going as a people and as a whole, you see? And their organization must be structured in terms of overall goals, national and international goals. When the United States has been challenged, white folk in the United States were challenged by the Japanese. They looked at what? Their educational system. And they are trying to transform their educational system and the educational experiences of their youngsters so that they can create in them the motivations and attitudes and relations that will make them possible to defend themselves against the growth of Asian power in the world. They're not just teaching them ABC, 1, 2, 3, or how to add accounts. All of this has to be integrated under a national goal. You see, we are doing business not only just because we want to go to work and come home and buy beer and look at football, but because doing business in this way and relating to each other this way and doing accounting in this way and so forth, allows us as a nation to protect our interests, to maintain our style of life, to maintain our freedom and independence, even though you as an individual think you are just going to work and coming home. You see, and think you're just drinking beer and looking at the football game. But frankly, if you look at the totality of the way the economic and political system operates, you're a part of a total system, and what you do is integrated in a system that is designed to act in the world. Now, we as African people then must lose our unconsciousness in this system. We must become conscious of ourselves as workers, as professionals, as this and that, and whatever we are, and be aware of how what we do is integrated and related to the whole of African people and to African ends and purposes. So it is not enough just to gain skills or just to gain knowledge. You must ask skills for what, knowledge for what, and in what way does my skill and my knowledge contribute to the advancement of African people as a whole? In what way can these skills be institutionalized and be built into the culture such that our culture expresses itself as power? I'll end it here. We talked the other day about white global supremacy, the other evening, Wednesday. And I wanted to get my people to understand, though, that there's a crisis in white global supremacy. White global supremacy is in severe, severe crisis. In fact, we may be witnessing the decline and fall of white supremacy in the world. That's why, again, I mentioned other ethnic groups, because we get too caught up on what white folk are doing. We're going to look up one day and find that white folk ain't even in control of the world anymore. That's right. That what we're dealing with are what? Asians. That's right. Yeah. The Asians have already called this the Asian century. They call it this what? Consciously. They know exactly where they are going and what they want to do. And don't get caught up in this idea because they ain't white, they're in your favor. Oh yeah, we like to get that up, We like to get on that kick. Non-white, you're... The Japanese have already given you a taste of how they feel about you. The Japanese have the highest, probably the highest racial superiority complex of any group on this globe. Oh yeah, you just don't hear about that part. They have even Koreans over there they haven't assimilated yet. That's right. Yeah. That's right. Chinese as well. That's right. Very chauvinistic, very superiority-oriented ideas of who and what they're about. If you think you're going to get a better break under the Chinese, a better break under the Japanese, or these other people, you got another thought coming. You must understand this situation. The United States is in terrible trouble. You haven't even heard about the trouble yet. You're sitting here wishing Bush is going to do something to, what is that man's name? Clinton. You have to understand the American presidency isn't the power it used to be. Not at all. The American presidency cannot exhibit the kind of influence in the world that it used to exhibit. And you must recognize that even the United States' internal economy is to a good extent out of its control. Yes. Yes. You got to understand what's going on here. That many of the restructuring, that this country is in so much debt that it cannot even rebuild its infrastructure and its highways and the other things that it needs to be. That it lived during the whole of the 80s on the goodness of the Japanese. That this country was not financed by white Americans at all. No. One day we'll have to talk business here and talk about bonds. How is the government in debt? Anybody has an idea how a government goes in debt? What do we mean that a government is in debt? Huh? What is a bond? You hear it every day, stocks and bonds. We hear it every day, stocks and bonds. What is a bond?
Take that money and make it, but do what they got to do and pay you back later with eventually.
It's essentially a what? Loan. It's a loan. Corporations raise money through bonds. They sell stock. That's one way of raising it. And if they go poop, you're through with it, right? You're on stock, it's over. They also raise money through bonds. When you buy a bond, you are lending money to a corporation or to a government. And so government finances itself through selling bonds. And its bonds are rated just the way your credit is rated. And these bonds are bought by banks just the way banks lend you money. Insurance companies and individuals if they have enough money. And they are bought by other governments. You see. So with the United States being overburdened, spending much more than it could afford, sold bonds, and the Japanese and the Taiwanese have what? Bought those bonds. This means that the United States government and the governmental system and economic system is in hock to the Asians already. You understand what I'm talking about? Am I clear? They've been such hock, and their money and wealth has flown out to such a degree until they even borrowing more money from foreign banks than domestic banks. They're in such hock that their industry is now going into partnerships with foreign companies. And in going in business with foreign companies, they are selling them their technology before they can even develop it within this country. They're selling them their knowledge and technique. They are shipping out their research and development facilities now. You understand what I'm talking about? Huh? That means the basic infrastructure, the economic infrastructure of the United States is being shipped out and sold, lock, stock, and barrel, to other people and to other nations. And that's the thing that Clinton is facing today. They've given away money to the middle class. See, they made you think they was giving it all to the poor. But actually the people who make over $100,000 and $50,000 get more money out of the U.S. government than people who make under 10. Yeah, that's the reason why they have the problem. They call it entitlements, but you never hear them discuss what entitlements are, do you? You think when they say entitlements, they're referring to welfare people, right? No, it's the fact that they have given this money to middle classes and upper middle classes and permitted them to rob the government now. And now politically it's difficult for them to do what? Take it back. In fact, Clinton wants to give them what? More. But now he's recognized that the debt is so terrible that he may have to go back on that promise. That's terrible. That means there's a crisis here. Tremendous crisis. You think that you're going to get by just getting skills, you got another thought coming. I told you the other evening that within the Russian economy, you could pay a Russian physicist, top flight physicist, $20 a month. The ruble's value is in such a relationship to the United States until you can hire a top flight Russian physicist, a number one, for $20 a month of American money. There are engineers in India, Indonesia, and other places that are as well, if not better educated than American engineers. And therefore, many companies now are not only beginning to ship their manufacturers out to these countries, they're beginning to ship their research and developmental facilities out, which means even their creative ideas and other things will be generated in other nations. Do you understand what I'm telling you? There are people in Ireland today processing data for Reader's Digest out here in Hightstown, New Jersey, wherever. Yes, sitting at computer terminals, handling all the subscriptions and everything, and taking that information from Ireland directly into the main computer there. They don't have to hire input people here at all. And they're doing it for a third of what they pay. There are people with MBAs over there being paid half of what an MBA is paid to process information. But you got to know what the hell is going on in this world. Do you understand? And understand the situation and the circumstances we face as a people. And you can see then why they're in the jail and why what's going to go on. You haven't seen the worst of it yet. You haven't begun to see the worst of it yet. This is why you got to transform your education. You just can't say, get an education, get a skill. So what skill? Do you know often, too, as things become even more automated and so forth, you don't need those skills. Because the friendlier the computer becomes, the less skill you need in programming it, don't you? Yeah. So anybody can work it. And if anybody can work it, why not take it to Mexico? Why not take it to Indonesia? Why not take it over here? So they work the whole thing, man. We'll talk about it another day. We'll talk about how these ghettos have been created deliberately by the economic system here and what's going on here. You got to understand this, though. But the Japanese and the Asians are outstripping this country. And this country feels that if it is to compete, it must then move into the global market and operate in a global system, which means to a great extent denuding its own people. Denuding even what? White folk. Not only black folk, but white folk. They're telling you on one hand how they need all your skills and all your competence, and yet what did I tell you the other evening? GM is firing 74,000 people. IBM is getting rid of 20 or 30,000 people. Come on, what are you talking about? How are you going to tell me you need more skills and what's happening? You're getting rid of all your skilled people. Come on. There's something wrong here. There's a hoax being played here. And then on the other hand, they'll tell you, and you hear it every day, that it is the small companies that are generating what? Employment in America. Not the large companies. The large companies are what? Shrinking and fading away. And that the future employment possibilities in America lies with the development of small businesses. That's the time now, you see. You don't got to build, steel companies, ladies and gentlemen, African men and gentlemen. You don't have to build now big IBMs and all these other stuff to compete now, because the weight lies with what? The smaller companies. Understand what I'm saying? And so in a sense, the crisis of this democracy, or whatever you want to call it, represents our what? Our opportunity. You see, the European system is in almost complete disarray. As a matter of fact, the economic system, if you understand and look at it closely, one of the things you find out is you can't understand it. Even the Europeans don't understand it. Oh yes, it's dangerously out of control. Very dangerous, very precarious. If you read Economist magazine some months back, they had a long piece on they really don't know what's going on there. You understand? But you see the Russian Empire has collapsed, and collapsed in terms of what? Ethnicities and groups and so forth. After 40 and 70 years of telling these people, oh, communism is godless, and it is raceless, and it is classless. And what's the first thing that happened when communism fell down? Race, class, and God start fighting. Okay, people started killing each other in terms of what? Race, God, and class. So after what? 70 years of communist propaganda and control of the Russian Empire, the old bugbear what? Ethnicity raised his head. And you want to sit around here and think a little belief in Christianity and a little belief in Islam is going to take racism out of the world. You got another thought coming. No way. It ain't over by a long shot. You know what I can't understand? God sat around here and made all of these different ethnic groups, and then we make it holy to ignore it all. You know, really. You know, to me it's a type of blasphemy. You know, you made all these colors, but let's forget about all of this. Identity is based on some degree of what? Similarity. Individual interests are protected by social organization. And on some level, some group, even if they're within the same ethnic group, find some basis for similarity and some basis on which to organize as a group to protect their interests. But what they're trying to tell you is to lose any basis and foundation for connecting with anybody. But that's not the way the real world operates at all. Not at all. And now what do we have going over here? The European system is in disarray. East Germany is soaking up the wealth of West Germany. And so the Russian Empire is collapsing. And what do you see coming out of here? An intense increase in what? Racism in Europe. An increase of racism over the world, ladies and gentlemen, because as the pie shrinks, as the possibilities shrink, people will tend to move in terms of their ethnicity and operate based on their ethnicity. I told people years ago that integration in America could only work in an expanding economy. It's not moral, people holding hands. It's about what? An expanding economy. We got a lot of jobs, we'll let you have a few. We'll bring you up. We don't have any jobs, we're going to cut you out. I told you before, there's no book, ain't no law in the book, civil rights law in the book or in the Constitution is going to make a white man feed your child before he feeds his own. I don't care how many books you got or laws you got or whatever you got. In the end, they're not going to feed your children before they feed their own. Only sick Negroes feed other people's children before they feed their own. Yeah, this is the thing. And so as this shrinks, other groups are going to get a part of this pie. And you're going to have to face the fact then that as you lose these jobs out of industries, and this is a lot of why the violence is going on, Detroit being completely de-industrialized almost, you see, and as these opportunities shrink, what other groups do is bump down. You see, they bump other groups out and begin to do what? Take their place to maintain their survival. You see, the days during which the men and women in Detroit could go to Ford and make a lot of money, go to GM and make a lot of money, go to the steel mills and all those, make a lot of money. In a sense, it didn't matter to them if those other people owned the little shops and the little stores and the little this, the little that. They were doing quite well. You know, so what? I'm making big money. I'm living well. But now what happens now that those things have what? Disappeared. Something has got to move. Either you're going to say, well, I'll just be nice and kind and die and starve out here or rob and kill, or what? I've got to what? Get control of the assets, what? That I have what? Left. You see? And you have to tell the others, no personal feelings, you know, I have everything against you, but I got to feed my children. I got to clothe my children. I got to take care of them. But you don't have anything against that, do you? That's what you told me you were doing in the neighborhood, right? That you only taking care of your kids, right? What does this mean then in the long run, ladies and gentlemen? That we as African people, given the deep restructuring that is going on in the world, are going to have to find another economic way out. We are going to have to create jobs. We're going to have to create an economic system. We're going to have to employ ourselves and create means of taking care of our people. That means then that we are going to first have to capture our economic infrastructure from other groups. Number one, because you must accumulate capital. And you must withdraw as much as possible of your capital from others in order to use it for yourself. And this goes on with groups all the time. Reagan did it. Reagan did it. Why do you think the poor got poorer and the rich got richer? They ran a game called supply side economics, which meant that if you give the people who have money more money, they will take the money and invest it and build factories and hire the people who don't. But we were put in a trick. But that's the supply side, you see. In other words, give it to people who got it, and they will invest it and create more. But it didn't work out that way, did it? So the laws were changed, and the system was restructured. This is what you call cutting. When jobs are cut, or when programs are cut, this isn't just a cutting. This means money is being what? Transferred. It is being moved from one group, or one set, into the hands of other set. So this is what you call capital accumulation. The money that was once going to the poor and so forth now is redistributed it to the wealthy. Now, the wealthy, in their gracious manner, were supposed to invest it and create jobs, but that wasn't what happened. They played shell games with each other and created paper wealth and so forth, and then sold the companies off and shipped the stuff out and became international citizens and left us in the lurch. Even the white is in the lurch. Everybody's in the lurch here, see? Now, the black community then must accumulate capital so that it can invest in its own infrastructure, which means then it must redistribute its money and its wealth. It must take the money back and reduce the flow of money outward to other groups, accumulate it in itself, and invest it in itself so that it can create abundance for itself. The black community now must not lament being in the diaspora, but really see the diaspora as your most powerful economic instrument. You see, while we complain about global white supremacy and we complain about white imperialism, you must also recognize that white imperialism was in effect too a white diaspora. Am I getting through? In other words, it also spread white folk where? Around the world. It wasn't just a colonizing of African people. You had colonizers. And the colonizers came to what? Live in all major areas and cities and places around the world. Using their ethnicity, they created lines of what? Communications all around the world. They built what? Commercial what? Networks all around the world, huh? They traded with each other, what? All around the world. You understand what I'm saying? So they scattered around the world, but in maintaining their ethnic identity and interests, they were able to create a global economic, political, and military system. Am I getting through to you? I know I'm keeping you a little late, but I just want to talk to you a little bit. Now then, and this is happening to the Japanese, and this is happening to Koreans and others. As they move into a global market, they disperse what? Globally. And they maintain, and they have their what? Center cities, central banking areas, and all of these means by which they maintain a global system, you see. Now, African Americans, you have great possibilities here, you see. We are spread from one end of America to the other. We're in all of its major cities. We already have national networks set up right now in the names of churches and organizations. And again, looking at the Nation of Islam and other groups. And so you have already national what? Administrative networks. But you see, when you think of, until you think of nation, you can't use them, see? But when you begin to recognize, you should look then at the possibility of developing trade networks across this country, of developing and setting up a distribution system across this country. We should make all of these supermarkets and others make room on their shelves for black manufactured products. Because now once you got a distribution network set up, and you have markets all across the country, you have a basis for manufacturing, you see, and distribution in the country. If you organize these things now, you can deal with the Caribbean as an African American nation, you see, and you can deal with the African continent as an African American nation. With your accumulated wealth and power and economic organization, you can now begin to have a major impact on U.S. foreign policy and transform that policy in a way that it stimulates the economic development of African nations. You can make African nations now receive favored nation treatment. You see, lower tariffs against African manufactured products. Create a market for the sale of African manufactured products within this country, you see. See, people will tell you that it's because the Japanese were so industrious, or because they had such great family values, or because they were Confucians, and all of this is the reason why now they're an economic power in the world. Well, if that's the case, why weren't they an economic power 2,000 years ago? It takes more than that. Why did they only become an economic power basically after World War II? Because of the nature of what? The relationship that this country what? Had with them. A relationship that was fundamentally different from the relationship it has with African nations. Why is Korea going today, ladies and gentlemen? Because they sent black men over there to die in the soil of Korea and to protect Korea as an investment market for white men. And black men and women over there today still protecting South Korea as a market for investment for white men and white people. And yet it's black lives that were given and black tax money that executed that war over there and that built this investment possibility. It is black taxes that maintains the ships and the airfields and the other things that also preserve what? The investment possibilities for private capital. And so you have public capital being spent in the interest of private wealth. And then they try to tell you in America that you have no right to ask for anything from the U.S. government. You understand? And yet this government took its industrial genius, its organization and so forth, and taught the Koreans industrial organization and development. Japan's highest economic award, an industrial award, is named after an American, the Walter Deming Prize, a very prestigious prize. Why? Because it was Walter Deming who basically taught the Japanese industrial organization and production. Do you understand what I'm saying? In other words, it was what? The relationship of the United States government and the type of relationship that this government had with Japan, opening its markets, lending its money, rebuilding its infrastructure, protecting it against the incursion of Russians and other people, providing a nuclear umbrella and all of this for the Japanese. And then they're going to tell you that they're ahead because they have family values. You're out of your mind. And then they're going to make, and by implication, try to tell you that the Africans don't, that the Africans are lazy, that the Africans are miseducated, that the Africans are this, and the Africans are that. Come on, don't believe that mess. It is a result of the fact of U.S. policy, which means then that the African American, which I believe is the central principle to the advancement of African people the world over, must organize economically so that we can organize politically, open these markets up to African manufacturers the world over, so that the Africans in the diaspora in Africa and the Caribbean and other places can have places and markets for the selling of their products. Am I making myself clear? Yes. Now we even have large numbers of Africans in Europe, you see. So if we build in a network of Africans right in this country, build a marketing system for Africans in this country, and also use the accumulated capital we get from that market to even invade the European system in America. Reginald Lewis died this week. Very interested in this. How does a man capture a national food company? We have to learn this. How do we capture? We don't have to recreate the wheel. Let's buy them out. You see, let's control them. Let's use our consumer power to bring them under control as people and have them operate in our interests as people, you see. And when we do that, then we can build a Pan-African universe. We can use the African diaspora, as every group has used this diaspora, based on its ethnic identity, based on its cultural commonalities, to enhance its power in the world. The Japanese are relating, who are Asians, are relating to whom? Asians, and building an Asian realm. The Latinos are building a Latino realm. The Mexicans and other Latinos now are taking up the American coast, right from California, right around the rims of Southwest America, right on through what? Florida. Because of what? They're getting ready to become the main exporters and importers of what? Latin American products, and be the controllers of Latin American trade. Before you know anything as African people, we will be locked in completely from every coast in America, you see. And we had better move in Alabama, in the coast of Mississippi, in Georgia, and Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina, and keep some of that stuff so that we can engage in Atlantic trade with our people, so that we can be in control of African products that move out of here and African products that move in here. If not, we shall be doomed to destruction by this system. Crisis is opportunity. Racial identity, cultural identity is the means by which African people will reclaim their own. Thank you very much. Thank you, thank you.
All right. Oh, hold on, before you go. All right, no. You got time for Q&A, Amos? Question and answers, no.
When I gave it in here, about 200-300 people one day when Dr. Ben was here, and it was about $25 a week that we can put together every week to get our building fund, and we would have had right now. And we've been doing this for 2 years over here right now. And that same proposal I brought to my job, and the unconscious people got 14 people together to go through when they get their buildings. I couldn't get none from here. And I got 2 people from my job who know nothing about history to get involved with it. And I felt very bad that I couldn't get nobody from here to do that. And I found that basically through this is that basically we have C and BC people, conscious but not committed.
Yeah, okay.
Instead of C and C people. They come with conscious and committed to what you were saying. And one of the things I think I can help you with is that one of the brothers that is helping me with this here project that we do this introduction with, he's the head of a credit union.
Oh, great.
He would be glad to meet with you to help you because he runs one already.
Great networking. Okay, in the light of the time, I won't elaborate on this too much. But I think some people obviously sort of, as I tried to get across an election, misidentify what culture is about, you see, and do not recognize that it involves commitment and ultimately doing. Some people, too, frankly, have not been really transformed inside, and often are into this, I say doing the right thing for the wrong reason sometimes, you see, are still being somewhat reactionary. Others who come through this so perfectionistic are still so filled with hostility and anger until any little, what they perceive as deviation or lack of purity is an excuse for them to scatter the whole thing and to take away the whole thing, or to blame the others for not being conscious enough or African-centered enough, and therefore they can't operate with these unconscious people. And so what you have is the very ones that you need to work and to become models and so forth are using the excuse of how others are unconscious as a basis for themselves not acting, and yet not realizing the fact that if we were all what we should be already, then we wouldn't have to be going through this at all. That our whole purpose, one of our major purposes, is to create a consciousness in people which recognizes that it is not there.
Brother Amos, even tonight, when I told people we need to pick out a building, and some people here would help me go pick out a building site that we need, everybody that was here should be running up saying, what can I do so we can pick out this building? I'm the ones that got to run and get this building. Because basically the people here, you figure out more conscious than the people that are not here.
Well, there's still people who are suffering from lack of self-confidence, still despite, the superficial things, are still yet wrestling with their ability to really trust each other and to really fully give themselves to an organization. And of course, we all to a degree are still wrestling with these problems and issues. And some then still have not really moved in their personality. This is the reason why I tell people often that the ideology that the person projects is not the only thing you should measure them by. You really must measure them by their personality, you see, and look at them in terms of persons, and you got to also try to figure out why they got into what they're into. Because sometimes all the reasons for being African-centered or looking African-centered are not healthy. You see, there are many of those who have backed into African-centeredness, who, because they were rejected and angered, you see, sort of came into it. And so in a sense, they still harbor a great love and desire for their masters, or they still harbor the original attitudes. And so if the other people were to send a signal that they were genuinely ready to accept them, they would drop their African dress immediately and go right back. This is the reason why I tell people, you can't enter this African-centered approach based on rejection. You see, you must believe in this approach and our ideas in other words, what you believe in, you should believe in had white folk never existed in the world. You see, it should not really be connected to the way white folks have treated you. You see, so if you back into African-centeredness based on a mere reaction to rejection by white folk, it means really psychologically that they still have control over you, and you're still holding out hope, and you're still really acting on a reactionary level. But when you operate on the fact that this is the kind of culture I would want and the kind of relationships I would want, even if white folk never existed in history, then you're not connected with their actions and so forth, but you're motivated by something that comes from within the self and for the self. And this is what you must see in people you seek to deal with, because often there are those who will even go along with you, but who, when the time comes that whites indicate that, you know, they have some genuine feeling, will betray you and turn you over. So it's where we just have to be more perceptive. Was this? Yeah.
Yeah. Trying to work with our people, I was turned off to Christianity based on people that attend the church. The fact that they could escape from evil deeds by praying heavily. And it seems that in the nationalist in the community and in the lecture circuit, there are a lot of people that attend, and that is their commitment to the struggle. I think they have to be made accountable as well. I think that at every lecture, it has to be what he said. And I listened to Dr. Clark, and he said the same thing, but no one seemed to hear him. At the end of his lecture, he said, I'm not writing so that you can read this and go home. I'm writing so that you can read this and act. And our lecturers continue to say that, and must continue, I suppose. But as I was saying about the Christian church, I mean, what we do, I left that alone, and it chases a lot of people away from lectures. It changes, like I don't want to hear any more lectures, but I learned a lot tonight.
Thank you.
I want people to act. A man is known by his deeds.
Yes.
If you want to know man's personality, he's known by his deeds. And we come in all different shapes and forms, African people, and we find help in all different shapes and forms. And what I would like to recommend is there's such a small pool of people who are willing to act that perhaps we could share some of these people amongst our organizations. Because certainly if you were doing something as good as I am, unfortunately I don't do it. If I had the ability to help 1 hour a week, I would give it. And I would promote your program. And I think Dr. Bell, we also have to promote each other's programs.
Sure.
I think organization is the thing for our future now, working and making it into working together.
Okay, thank you kindly. I appreciate your comments very much. We have to get over this issue, sometimes what I call a secular religion, too, where people are coming to the lectures basically looking for a rush. And while, of course, the lectures should invigorate us, and that's one of their purposes, is also to invigorate, to maintain faith and so forth, but we can't let that be the sole purpose. And I find many people still are sort of caught up, even though they're out of the church, in a sense, they're still in it, you see, and they've secularized their need for some kind of jolt, and that can become addictive. It's also very rough sometimes to be honest with you, on us as lecturers, particularly on me, because there are many times when I would really sometimes rather just talk, and interact. And yet, even though many of us are out of the church, we still want to be preached to. That's one thing about the oral tradition, you see, that we have to analyze. And that oral tradition was to a great extent sometimes also used to create emotion and feeling. And that has its place, you see. But we also have to watch out, because many of the things we need to know and learn cannot be delivered in that style. And yet, we are caught in the trap sometimes that if you don't, then people are falling asleep on you, or they, not paying attention to you and so forth. So gradually, I hope we can move to a style where we can be a bit more instructive, a bit more even-toned to deliver really some solid information. And of course, hopefully, we will deliver information more closely related to actual activity as well. I know we got to inform and teach, but we also have to be able to do this. The place I have over there is not just a place for us. Those people who've been there know that we can hold up to 200 people in that place. I've offered the community the use of the facilities as well, yes, and we have a space that any people in our community can use, and we cooperate with our community for using the facilities. We have the facilities for the community, and we charge or don't charge or whatever, depending on what people have. The rent is going to get paid. So, we're making ourselves available. Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's a real simple question. I want you to identify some other literature on, that defining the problem of different solutions. You were talking about Cecil Williams' book, after the World Revolution, and what other books may be going forward.
There's a book, I don't know whether it's being distributed up here. Nation Building by a person named Koto. Yes, excellent book, particularly in the context of African-centered education, but is African-centered education structured in a way that I mentioned earlier, that I think very much is structured in terms of nation building, and has nation building as the apex of what the education is about. And he lays out in detail, in fact, his is the only one I've seen that really lays out in detail an African-centered education that moves all the way from spirituality right down to computer science and technology. So there's nothing left out of it. It doesn't stop at history and culture and so forth, but it goes right down, goes right on into political science. It includes political science and the whole 9 yards of it, because it's designed for power. Of course, the Marcus Garvey, but the other one, the little blue and white book, I can't recall it right now. You don't see it as often, but it's done by the gentleman who writes about Garvey and publishes. Tony Martin, yeah, in his series, where, of course, and it's interesting, because, of course, you saw he even had a network of people across the nation. And it's interesting, too, that he had something almost like a 3-year training program, which is another thing I keep telling us. We cannot solve the problem of African people meeting 2 or 3 hours on weekends. You've got to have ongoing 24/7 institutions. And sometimes it will take you 2 to 3 to 4 years to move people to the level of development you want to. Here we are fighting people who keep people in school for 30 and 40 years. What do you think a PhD is? Or what have you.